Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast Summer Edition. I'm Zach Ewing with LSU football beat writer for The Advocate, Wilson Alexander. Wilson, good to be joining you as we're recording this ahead of time, so I don't actually know what day it is as y'all are watching this, but we're coming up on July if it's not already July. And like media days are in a couple of weeks. I mean, all of a sudden the 2025 season feels like it's right here.
Especially because we're recording this on the heels of LSU baseball winning the national championship, the NBA finals ending, the Stanley Cup, has been won. Hockey season is over. So it really just feels like I was trying to sit there and think about this last night. I'm like, is the only thing that we have between now and football season just, the middle of summer for Major League Baseball and maybe a little golf? Like, I can't think of anything else. It feels like really all the attention is now going to turn toward just getting ready for football season. Am I missing anything?
Well, so I'm a big soccer fan, but even as a big soccer fan, the Club World Cup does not do it for me. So I don't think the players care about these games. I don't think the teams care. The stadiums are half full, so I'm kind of out on the Club World Cup. Otherwise, I'd say that. But yeah, I mean, you got like Wimbledon and the British Open, and then all of a sudden it's football.
How can I forget Wimbledon? But even then, that's that's still a couple weeks away, and yeah, it's so short. It's such a short event that when you think about compared to a full baseball season or something, or full football season, that it doesn't quite fill that void fully. Not to discredit it though. I've been to Wimbledon once. It was a fantastic experience. My brother cried when we got to center court. It was amazing.
I think I'm going this year, actually. Just to the outer courts. We're not going to go to the show courts, but I'm headed to England here soon, so we're going to go. Point being, it's football season. That was a long-winded way of saying we're ready to talk about on the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. And one of the ideas we had to kind of set this season up, and we're obviously going to be dissecting this LSU team from top to bottom as we get into camp and then through camp. We're about a month away. Probably as you're watching this, it's like end of June, beginning of July, about a month away from camp. Was to look at LSU's 12 opponents and kind of rank them 12 through 1, the easiest to the hardest. And I don't know, just overall, Wilson, LSU's schedule, it's an SEC schedule. They open with Clemson. Obviously, it's a difficult schedule. It also does not include the SEC's playoff teams from a year ago. It doesn't include Georgia, Tennessee, or Texas. So it could be worse. I think it sets up favorably for them to have a chance to make a run at the college football playoff.
Yeah, I think so too. Like you said, they don't play Texas and they don't play Georgia, and that's a really helpful thing when you're looking at this schedule. However, they play a lot of teams that look like they could make a jump in the SEC this year. When you think about maybe Florida, is Texas A&M going to be improved? Oklahoma did a lot to try to get better through the transfer portal in particular. Alabama, is that going to be a better team than it was a year ago? So there's a lot of variables, but you're not facing sort of those known I hesitate. I almost used the word powers, and I don't think that's it because you're talking about a lot of power teams there, a lot of really good, perennially good teams. But I guess the teams that are coming off of high level success last year, you're not facing as many of them in the SEC schedule, and that probably helps. You're also getting some of what we think are your toughest opponents potentially, anyhow, at home. You got some tough road games, but you got Florida and South Carolina coming, and Texas A&M all at home. I think that helps too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was a little surprised you see on the screen there that LSU's win total at DraftKings is just 8.5. That means to hit the over, they would just have to go 9-3. Obviously, we're going to talk about some of their tough games. There are some games they will be underdogs in, at least a couple of them. So you're talking about either pulling an upset or this is not a prediction show, but I thought that number was maybe a tick low. Did you?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I mean, you're talking about a team that's coming off of an 8-4 regular season. However, with that tough opening game at Clemson, if the odds makers think that maybe that's a loss, then all of a sudden, you can only afford to lose 2 more games the rest of the way to hit the over. And so maybe that's what's being thought of there. I'm not really sure. Also, I was just going to add on to my point a minute ago where I was saying they got these teams at home. I mean, last year they got Alabama and they got Ole Miss at home. And, some of their toughest games we thought were all going to be at home. And then, they still went 8-4. So it just goes to show there's hard to really predict what's going to happen in July.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing is that our opinion will change. If we had done this last year, I mean, I'm trying to think how we would have ranked the games, and we might have done okay, but like I think Oklahoma would have been really high on the list. They ended up not being that good. Vandy would have been super low on the list. They ended up being a lot better than people thought. So it kind of depends on the year. Like by the time we get to October, we're going to think about some of these teams completely differently. So keep that in mind as we go through. I do think these first three are going to be pretty much the bottom three. I mean, like I say, gimmies. Nothing is ever a sure thing. Maybe Southeastern's a sure thing, okay, but like if you lose any of these games, then this season has gone off the rails. Put it that way. That no LSU fan will have the season that he or she wants the Tigers to have if they lose any of these games, or really come close to losing any of these games.
These are the games that you're paying out for. You're paying these teams to come and play you. LSU is going to pay a combined $4.15 million to these three teams for the right to beat them, is really the idea behind it. Western Kentucky went 8-6 last season. They almost upset Boston College, but they also lost 63-0 to Alabama in the season opener. Louisiana Tech has not been good now for a few years. They went 5-8 last year. There's nothing, there could be, I think, seasons when Louisiana Tech might be like, you might look at that and think, oh, that could be tricky, or at least give you a test. And that doesn't seem to maybe be the case right now and with it, where their program's at. And so I think all three of these teams, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on. These are games that LSU should win without much trouble and be able to move on to the tougher games on their schedule. I don't think there's really any lurking threat with these teams, at least on the surface right now, especially compared to the rest of the schedule. When we're talking about what are LSU's most difficult games going to be, it's not these three.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the South Alabama game last year where you looked at it, and at the time, everybody kind of pumps that game up and says, well, South Alabama put up 50 whatever points on a couple of opponents. This could be tough. And you get out there and you realize LSU is just physically superior to these teams. And that's going to be the case in all three of these games.
Right. And I mean, last year we were guilty of that too, a little bit, I think, we're talking about like, South Alabama, they've been playing fairly well. And then, LSU, there was some concern about LSU sort of handling that mobile quarterback and their running back at the time, Cliff Bothwell. And how are they going to do that? This is going to at least be like a test for them defensively. And they handled it. And actually it was kind of a signal of how their defense was getting better, I think, at the time, to an extent. Because that was, if I'm remembering correctly, right before the Ole Miss game. And then LSU played really well defensively against Ole Miss. And so, still, though, it wasn't what we maybe talked about it being in terms of how difficult it could have been in that moment.
We had the luxury of taking the 10,000-foot view in the offseason and saying, okay, week to week, we may have concerns about LSU, but they are much more talented than all three of these teams. Should beat them all. Last thing I was just mentioned there, 2 of those games are in the first 4 weeks of the season. So, kind of 2 built-in wins. And then Western Kentucky is the second to last week of the season. So it's kind of a breather before LSU plays Oklahoma. So that's the timing of those games. Now, getting into the ones we're going to rank individually. Number 9, we went at Vandy here, and just full disclosure, Wilson came up with the list. I made a couple of suggestions. We bumped a couple teams up and down a little bit, but I think we agree on this one. It is a road game. The Commodores do have Diego Pavia back. I mean, you could see this being, one of these. They don't have the Jefferson Pilot game anymore, but like one of those games where if you sleepwalk, you could find yourself at halftime and be like, oh no, we're in a game if you're LSU. But this is a game, as far as SEC games go, that you can at least pencil in as, hey, LSU goes there and plays well, they're going to win.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We're comparing this to the rest of the schedule, and all the teams that are on LSU's schedule, I think, are better than Vanderbilt. You can maybe make the argument about who we put number 8. I mean, I don't think it's really spoiling much about talking about number 8 already. Is going to be Arkansas. And you maybe say that Arkansas could be flipped here because you're going on the road to Vanderbilt, but you're not dealing with a imposing road environment at Vanderbilt. That's just that sometimes your own road fan base can take over that stadium at times. We saw that actually, I think, to a degree in 2019 when LSU went to Vandy. Diego Pavia is back, like you said, but LSU beat them last year with him on the team, 24-17. It really wasn't quite that close. It was 24-10 late in the fourth quarter, and Vanderbilt scored. LSU really bottled up Diego Pavia, and I expect LSU to be better defensively this year than they were last year. There's nothing else on Vanderbilt's offense that really frightens you from like a weapons on the outside perspective, really. And, I feel like Vanderbilt kind of surprised people in the first half of the year, and then they lost 3 in a row at the end of the regular season, including that loss to LSU. They kept a lot of games really tight Obviously, they had that upset of Alabama. Even in their losses, a lot of them were close games, in terms of the final score. They even won their bowl game against Georgia Tech. But I just wonder if they're going to be able to kind of like surprise people in the same way, if they're going to be able to continue to make that improvement year over year. Clark Lee's doing a good job there. He's got a stingy team, a team that believes. But it just feels like kind of like what you said a minute ago about some of the other teams. Like there's a talent gap there that should, win the day for LSU. And again, I just when you're talking about who else they go on the road to and who else they get at home and all that, I just feel like Vanderbilt's kind of at the bottom of the list.
I add this to the list of if you lose this game, then you really cannot have the season you envisioned having if you're LSU. It's just one of those they've got to win, even on the road. That's the only thing you hesitate here. LSU has not lost to Vanderbilt in the last 10 meetings. That dates all the way back to 1990 was the last time Vandy beat LSU. That was 24-21 in Nashville. And LSU has had some teams since then that were really not all that good, and they still managed to beat Vanderbilt. So like they've also had very good teams. Like the 2019 team went to Nashville and scored 66 points. But I just it's hard to envision LSU losing this. So we'll move on. You mentioned this one. Number 8 is a home game against Arkansas. LSU has won 8 of the last 9 against the Razorbacks. I think it was 2021 in Tiger Stadium was the only loss. But yeah, like again, can Arkansas beat you? Yes. We're now into the portion of the schedule where any of these teams, if they play an A+ game and LSU maybe takes a step back, you could lose an SEC game. But again, one that you got to take care of business if you're going where you want to go.
There's a 4-year stretch from 2020 to 2023 where this game was decided by 3 points every year. And then last year, LSU blew the brakes off of Arkansas 34-10 in Fayetteville and kind of snapped that close game streak that was going on within this rivalry. You got the battle for the Golden Boot here, which, everybody loves that trophy. It's so bizarre that it's just gigantic thing. Anyhow, Taylor Green at quarterback is back for Arkansas after throwing for more than 3,000 yards, but it's a question of like, what does he have really around him that should frighten LSU? There's nothing on paper that really appears to be to fall in that category. Their tight end Luke Haas transferred to Ole Miss, which is kind of something that's going to give Ole Miss an advantage. Later on as we talk about them in this ranking, but there's just not a lot at Arkansas that really gives you pause. I mean, there's questions about Sam Pittman's job security at the moment. He's coming off of what was it, hip surgery? I think it was, or something like that. He had like a hip or a knee replaced, and not that affects your job security, but the way that they played the last few years does. I mean, they had that big win over Tennessee last year, but other than that, it wasn't like a fantastic year up there at Arkansas. And you've also got this game in Tiger Stadium, so I just don't think that it is going to be very high on our list here.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, it was a hip replacement for Sam Pittman, by the way. The quote this was back in December, but the quote was, "I can walk maybe 20 yards without a cane," which I don't know why that just tickles me that I can just hear Sam Pittman saying that. But yeah,
I look forward to hearing him at SEC Media Days. He's always one of the more colorful characters right now in the SEC. It's fun. I look forward to hearing what he has to say about the Razorbacks.
Yeah. Well, you have to ask him how many yards he can get without a cane by July to see if
that would be a good Media Days type of question.
He's improved. They played hard last year. Arkansas had some games they could have won, should have won. Actually did pull off a couple of upsets, beat Tennessee there in Fayetteville, as you mentioned. Again, you're going to have to come with your A game to win these SEC games. So this one's just kind of in the middle. I will mention the timing of this one is a little bit, it's right after the Alabama game. And so is there a physical hangover? Is there an emotional hangover, whether you win or lose in Tuscaloosa the week before? You coming home, it could be a letdown spot if you let it be. I would think of LSU's in the playoff hunt at this point. That's not going to be a factor, but that is something to consider.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, but again, it's like you're getting them at home. And as we kind of get into the other teams on this list, they're not as good as, at least coming into the season, they don't seem as good as, Florida and Oklahoma and A&M and all that. So it's just, that's why we have them where we do.
And that's really the point here. This is no disrespect to Vandy or Arkansas. This is the rest of the teams on this schedule are very good teams. And so now we get into the portion where, you said you struggled a little bit to rank 3 through 7, Wilson, and I looked at them, and I think you're right. You could kind of toss them in a hat and say who's 3 through 7. These 5 teams we could have totally ordered differently than other people.
Yeah, this is where you start to get into the top 25, preseason top 25 type of teams that could maybe go on a run this year, any of them, I think. Nobody would be like shocked by it. They could also be mediocre. I mean, we're going to talk about Oklahoma in a minute, and there's a little bit of heat on Brent Venables going into this season to get the Sooners turned around and into the playoff kind of hunt. And LSU faces them at the end of November, and it's like, what kind of team is Oklahoma going to be? But we're not talking about Oklahoma yet. We're talking about Texas A&M here at number 7. I ended up going with them at 7 just because I feel like there's a little bit more talent with the teams in front of them, and that LSU is getting them at home. LSU has not lost to A&M in Baton Rouge since the Aggies joined the SEC. They've had trouble in College Station, but they haven't lost in Baton Rouge. And so with this game being in Tiger Stadium, I think that's a big part of why I ended up putting them at 7. Marcel Reed is back at quarterback. It's going to be really fascinating to see what kind of player he is this year, because we kind of have this memory of him from an LSU perspective of him in that game just running all over LSU, making a couple of key throws, but not having to do much with his arm. Can he make teams defend the pass? I mean, that's going to be kind of a huge question for this A&M team. Le'Veon Moss is back at running back. They've got a bunch back on the offensive line. And now you've got a whole offseason to sort of build around Marcel Reed. And maybe you don't even need him to be like light the world on fire as a passer, but you're going to need him to do some things in the passing game. And so Texas A&M added a bunch of receivers in the portal, especially Casey Concepcion from NC State. They also grabbed Jonah Wilson, Mario Craver from I think it's Mississippi State. But on the defensive side of the ball, you're losing a bunch up front over there at A&M. Shamar Stewart, Nick Scorton, Shamar Turner. Texas A&M has tried to replace them by adding 4 defensive linemen in the transfer portal. But those are 3 high-level defensive linemen. We saw it last year. That was a absolute battle in the trenches with Texas A&M last season. And now that was a big strength for that team. And now that you have to replace that, I just have some questions about what Marcel Reed can do as a passer at this point. And so that's why I put them at 7.
This is the Michael Scott Memorial game. The past 8 years, it's gone snip, snap, snip, snap. So they've alternated wins, and it's LSU's turn this year. Simple as that. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think there's going to be a little bit of a LSU wants to prove something after last year. They had that game under control midway through the third quarter. A&M brings on Marcel Reed. It all goes bad in a hurry. It all goes bad. As bad as it can go for the last 20 minutes of that game. And so I think LSU is going to they're going to be out for blood in this game, particularly if A&M is maybe not quite as good as they were last year, not as competitive. And if LSU jumps on them early, you could see this being one of those classic Tiger Stadium games where opponents' dreams come to die, right?
Well, it's also, Texas A&M, like I said, I struggled at putting them at 7 just because I felt like, oh man, you can make an argument for them being as high as, I think, 5 on LSU's most difficult game schedule. Like, what do you think the height? How high would you put them?
I think, and we don't want to, without giving anything away, like obviously Clemson and Alabama are 2 of the toughest games on the schedule. After that, though, like, could you make an argument? I guess because it's at home, it's hard to say that it's definitely tougher than like Ole Miss, which is on the road, or like Florida, we think is going to be very good. I mean, but I think you could at least make an argument that any of these next few teams could be in that 3 to 4 range.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious to see. Like, I think 5 is the limit for me with A&M on the list of LSU's most difficult games, especially because it's at home. If it was a road game, I'd have it much higher. Yeah, for sure.
I agree. And you'll see that we kind of have given deference to LSU's home field advantage on this list. I mean, the road games get bumped up, the home games get bumped down, kind of as it should be. And with that in mind, number 6, another team that some people could have higher. I think that would be fair, but it's also a home game for LSU, and that's South Carolina. They were the surprise of the SEC last year. They were in the college football playoff conversation all the way to the end. Lenoris Sellers was like a revelation, and LSU, quite frankly, should have lost in Columbia in that game last year. Got lucky to come out of there with a win. Now they get them at home.
Yeah, this is one of those teams, like you and I were talking about how we sort of worked on the rankings together, and South Carolina I originally had higher than this. But then we talked about, like, okay, home field for LSU, also, what is South Carolina outside of Dylan Stewart and Lenora Sellers? We don't really know yet. Like Nicholas Harbor is an athletic, uh, you know, freak wide receiver, but he hasn't really broken out as a true, like, talented, productive wide receiver. Like, he's just right now, it's a lot of athleticism that needs to kind of come together. They've still got Jalen Kilgore at safety. That really helps, but they're also having to replace some of their best players. Kyle Kennard at defensive end, Nick Eamon-Wari, first team All American there in the defensive backfield. They're going to need some transfers to hit around Lenora Sellers in order to be able to continue to improve as a team, continue to sort of just take that step forward. Off of a year, like you said, where they were really, I mean, they were one of the hottest teams in the country the second half of the season last year. There was an argument to be made for them making the playoff there at 12. But we're just going to kind of have to see how the South Carolina team comes together. And again, I think it's, LSU having a home game. It's for me, I think we kind of agreed on, like, okay, let's maybe drop them down a little bit from where I had them originally. But this is going to be a tough game. And this is a game that LSU's really got to win, because if South Carolina is a team that's capable of going on a playoff run this year, and you're asking the committee to look at head-to-head matchups, like, you need this one on your resume.
Yeah, I look, the other thing is that teams like South Carolina that are kind of, below the level of the perennial national title contenders in the SEC, if they have a good season, it's hard to maintain that. It's almost harder to maintain that than to have the one. We saw it like with Missouri last year. They dropped off a little bit from their really good 2023 team. We've seen it a little bit with Ole Miss through the last few years. We trying to think who else would qualify in that vein. But like you kind of, Auburn to a certain extent, like they're not the top 10 every year, going to compete for a national title every year. And it's hard to maintain that when you pop up and have a good season and then try to do it again. Kentucky a few years ago had a really good season, struggled to maintain it. So that's another example. Like, and I just kind of feel like maybe there's a little bit of regression there for South Carolina. The other thing is this is off of a bye week for LSU. So I have not looked at Carolina's schedule. I don't know if they're also off of a bye week, but for whatever that's worth, LSU will have a little bit of extra rest for this one too.
Yeah, that definitely is going to help. Another double bye week season this year.
Yeah.
Back-to-back years with 2 bye weeks built in. And that's, I think it's going to help. Obviously, the other one for LSU comes before Alabama.
Yeah, it's funny. They have the bye week and then play 3 games, South Carolina, Vandy, Texas A&M, and then have another bye week. So it's just kind of like a little mini 3-game stretch in between bye weeks there in October. Next up on the list, number 5. This, and again, you got to give deference to road games. Oklahoma. This was one I pushed to be higher, Wilson, when on your original list. I think the Sooners bounce back. I think kind of the converse of what I was saying, or the inverse of what I was saying about South Carolina, is teams that are traditionally national powers, when they have a bad year, they typically don't stay down. And we'll see about Oklahoma. They got John Mateer in from Washington State. They got a whole bunch of transfers in. Norman is a tough place to play. Like, end of the year, LSU could certainly have easier assignments than this.
This is one that's tough to really gauge because, like you said, it's at the end of November. What is Oklahoma going to be at that point? You're coming off of a 6-7 season, your first year in the SEC. Brent Venables really needs some wins to stack up this year. He's another guy who, coming into the season, where you think of like, okay, his seat's probably a little bit warm, to say the least, down there over there in Norman. But Oklahoma, they've overhauled sort of their front office structure, adding Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl. And they've also gone and kind of in conjunction with that, added some really key pieces in the transfer portal. You already mentioned Mateer, talked about already right now as one of the best quarterbacks in the country after what he did last season at Washington State. I mean, he threw for over 3,000 yards. He had 29 touchdowns, only 7 picks. He also rushed for 826 yards and 15 touchdowns. And then they also added in the spring Jaden Ott, which was disappointing to see him leave the Calgorithm. No more HOTTOGO over there at Cal with the Golden Bears. But, he had 1,300 yards in 2023. Last year, he was more banged up. But, if he can be that same kind of runner that he was 2 years ago for the Sooners, then all of a sudden offensively, which is where they really struggled last year, maybe they've improved and they're able to really, push teams around in some respect on the offensive side of the ball after being, there always seemed to be a pretty sound defensive team. Venables, that's his background. That makes sense. They've got to get things figured out on the offensive side of the ball. And if with Mateer and Ott and some of the other players they brought in through the portal, they're able to do that. They also went and they got some receivers. Nobody who's like, necessarily as big of a, household name at the moment, but we'll see if they can break out. Then all of a sudden, you're looking at Oklahoma as a team that can maybe make some noise this year, and LSU's got to go on the road to them at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, if you look at Bill Connolly's SP Plus rankings at ESPN, which is my favorite advanced metric, Oklahoma's preseason number 16 in the country. They were number 10 in the country in his returning production rankings, which includes transfers, by the way. So it's returning production from your roster and what you brought in the transfer portal. So they bring a lot of talent back. Now, I mean, you could argue that's talent from a mediocre team, but they also had injury problems last year.
Oh gosh, yeah. Remember they couldn't keep a receiver on the field.
Yeah, and so that you just don't expect that to happen again. They're gonna be better. And if you look at just that, if you anticipate them being like a top 20 type team, a road game there in late November, probably going to be cold. Like that's a tough game in my book. So that, I think it's justified at number 5.
Absolutely. And one thing else to note about sort of Oklahoma's situation, they also have a new offensive coordinator. Talking about all this change on the offensive side of the ball, brought in John Mateer, the quarterback. His offensive coordinator at Washington State, Ben Arbuckle, he's now at Oklahoma too. And so it's going to be fascinating to see how those things work out. And if you're catching Oklahoma early in the year, maybe these things aren't quite clicking yet, which we can say about a lot of teams in the transfer portal era. You always have that question. We'll talk about that a lot with LSU this year. Are things going to be clicking right out of the gate? But by the time you face them in November, they might be all on the same page there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's probably not a game you want to have at the end of the year, but you got to play somebody then. So, okay, that's number 5. We're into the top 4. 4 of the top 5 are road games, by the way, and that includes number 4. That is LSU's trip to Ole Miss on September the 27th. Haven't won in Oxford since the Joe Burrow Tigers. It's been kind of a little bit of a house of horrors up there the last 2 times.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason, where we have them, where we do at number 4. You're going on the road fairly early in the season. This one's tough. I mean, I don't know what to make of Ole Miss this year, kind of going into the season when they lost, they already lost Jackson Dart. They've got, they had some good defensive players, leave that team. They put so much into last year's team financially with NIL. It looked like they were going to try to make a playoff push, and then they went 9-3 again, and it wasn't, their losses were pretty ugly. They also don't bring out a lot back at wide receiver from last year's team. Trey Harris is gone in particular. They are going to have to replace a lot over there in Oxford. Austin Simmons in limited action looked good. Like he was really good for like that one drive that he was in the Georgia game when Jackson Dart was briefly out. Actually, this is going to be a blast for the past for LSU fans. Logan Diggs at running back is expected to be kind of their starter there after transferring out of LSU. He sat last season coming off of an ACL injury, but they did go and add some things like Caleb Odom, a receiver from Alabama. I mean, it's Lane Kiffin, self-described portal king. They've added a ton in the transfer portal, and it's hard to know exactly what they're going to be as a result of that, especially with Austin Simmons as a first-year starter. They're going to have to be able to maybe have some strengths in different areas than maybe they did the past years when you're talking about breaking in a first-year starter. But having to go on the road to that game with another team that's been pretty good the past few years under Lane Kiffin, that's why we have them there, I think, at number 4.
Yeah, and I don't know. This is the one for me that has maybe the most variance of any. Like this could end up being LSU's one of their 2 toughest games, maybe, but it could also end up being one of their easier SEC games. Like it's what is Austin Simmons? Can Lane Kiffin coach him up? I mentioned returning production rankings from Bill Connolly. Ole Miss is number 113 in the country. They bring back very little from last year's team. Now they went and hit the portal again. They have some backups who are highly touted recruits. Like there's talent on that team, but that's why I say I think we probably have this on the high end of where you would put it. But I could also see this being one where you look back at the end of the season and go, Ole Miss actually wasn't that difficult. LSU does play them in September. I think there's a good chance both teams are top 25 teams at that point, though.
Yeah, I think so. Back to the portal stuff for just a second. Yeah, Ole Miss has added 30 players in the transfer portal. They have the number 4 class in the country, according to 24/7. It's hard to know what a team is going to be when you add that much in the portal.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a total variable in LSU season right here is how good is Ole Miss, and frankly, you don't want them to be terrible because you don't want to take that strength of schedule hit, right? But I don't know that you want them to
Their
be.
schedule will be just fine with even if Ole Miss
You're in
isn't.
the SEC. If you went 10-2, you'd be fine. That's true. It's a new era. I lose. Okay, top three. If you have been paying attention, you know who is in our top three. Before we get to them, though, hit the like button, subscribe to the LSU Tigers at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Help us grow the channel as we enter the 2025 preseason here. Number three, the last home game on the list, it is the Florida Gators. And I am going to say, Wilson, one of the reasons you have this game so high on this list is because of the timing of it. It is so early in the season. It is week 3, and it's a huge swing game.
If you lose that Clemson game, and then you who's it that they're facing next? Is it Louisiana Tech or Southeastern? Yeah. Okay. So, like we said earlier, one of the games
right.
you're paying for that you think you should win. Okay. So you go into this. If you lose the Clemson game and you go into this 1-1, you've got a tough test here in Baton Rouge in week 3 with your season on the line. And LSU was in the same boat last year, going to South Carolina. Had to win that game to be able to stay in college football playoff contention. They won that wacky game at South Carolina. But you're kind of in the same spot here where you've got a tough SEC team week 3 after a really difficult opener. And, a Clemson team that we'll talk about here in a minute that is formidable. And so Florida last year beat you in the swamp. And now you don't have to go to Gainesville. That's helpful for LSU here. But it's still, a Florida team with probably one, at least for my money, one of the best quarterbacks that they're going to face this year in DJ Lagway. He was really good last year. Showed a lot of promise. I mean, I think it was 1,900 yards or so, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, which is higher than you would certainly want. But if he's somebody who can continue to develop going into year 2, we saw the arm talent when LSU had to play them last year in Gainesville. He made some throws that LSU just could not defend. I mean, there was guys that were in relatively decent position trying to ride the hip of a receiver, and Lagway just put the ball where only his guy could get it. He was playing that game on like one leg too, because he'd had the hamstring issue, and he still gave LSU fits. And that's the other thing about it, though, is they're returning a lot of their offensive line around him. They've got some solid running backs. It'll be interesting to see at receiver. They added some promising recruits, Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown the third. They've got a really, really tough schedule. I feel like this is one of those things where Florida, all over the course of the season, might not be like the best team LSU plays. Like in terms of the final record, like they might not even be in the college football playoff hunt if this really difficult schedule that they have, proves to be so. Where just like last year, they go 8-5, but if they had maybe a different schedule, maybe it's not as bad. Like they've got a really, really tough stretch there this season. So they might not be like by the end of the season the best team that LSU plays, but it feels like one of the toughest games on LSU schedule.
Just looking again at the SP Plus rankings, the top 3 strength of schedules in the country belong to 3 LSU opponents. Oklahoma, Florida, and Arkansas are the top 3. So yeah, they all play tough games, and LSU is one of them. But yeah, this is one where, boy, you just need a home field to hold up for you. And LSU hadn't lost to Florida in quite some time until last year. This is a night game, Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. Like you got to get after it.
That really helps, I think. And the other thing to note about Florida, I just talked a lot about their offense, but defensively, they held each of their last 4 opponents to fewer than 17 points last season. Like that defense got after a little bit. Now, one of their defenders came to LSU, Jack Pyburn, but they're going to be a tough test here. I think that though, even though LSU, we gave a lot of weight to the road teams a minute ago, but this is one of those teams where I just think that there's some talent there. You've got a really good quarterback in Lagway. Florida, I feel like, and again, like you said, we started the positioning of where it is on the schedule. If you come into that game at 1-1, and you have to face Lagway, that's a tough spot to be in. That's part of the reason why we ended up kind of giving it that number 3 spot, even though it is a home game in Tiger Stadium. Which is when we actually get to game week, who knows, maybe end up picking LSU because of that sort of nighttime in Tiger Stadium atmosphere. But it's a really tough spot on the schedule, I think.
Yeah, it's a big game. I mean, people are going to be totally up for it. And by the way, for Florida, they open with, is it Long Island they play? LIU? Is that Long Island? No, that's got to be somebody else. I don't even think they have a football team. And then South Florida is the other one. So they should be 2-0 coming in. We're not going to know a ton about Florida at that point. LSU will have played Clemson, but it's going to be a barn burner, man. Looking forward to that one on September the 13th.
LIU is Long Island University.
Are they the Sharks? Is it? Do they? I
They
didn't
are
even.
the Sharks.
Okay, I guess that's right. They didn't even have I didn't even realize they had a football team. So
Great
Florida and
guess for not
Long
realizing they had a football team. You hit it the nail on the head.
Okay, so we're to the top two. Long Island is not on the list. I think these two are pretty obvious. It's just sort of how you order them. I think they have to be 1 and 2 in one order or the other. We wanted Alabama as number 2. I don't know. Like you could say number 1, but Alabama does not have the returning quarterback. Clemson does. That's the difference for me. I'm assuming it was for you too.
That's absolutely right. I mean, Kate Klubnik coming back at quarterback, considered one of the top quarterbacks in the country this year. And he's also somebody who might be a first-round draft pick. All those sorts of things. He can run a little bit, which we know has given LSU fits in the past, versus Ty Simpson, most likely at Alabama. Like they haven't even necessarily set that Ty Simpson will be the starter, but all indications seem to be that he's kind of the leader in the clubhouse going into preseason camp there. The thing about Alabama being at number 2 is you're going to Bryant-Denny Stadium for that game. It's LSU Alabama. It's always a huge game. Usually the winner of that is in the driver's seat to reaching. I guess now it used to be winning the SEC West and reaching Atlanta for the SEC title game. Now I guess it's winning one of the 12 playoff spots. But there's everything around Ty Simpson. I mean, this Alabama team looks really good. You start with Ryan Williams at receiver, but you've also got Jam Miller back at running back, Keaton Proctor back at offensive tackle. You got Deontay Lawson at linebacker, Damani Jackson, Keon Sabin, the secondary. Like they've got some talent on this team, but it's really good. It's going to depend on what they got at quarterback.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? If you don't have the quarterback, it's hard to say that the rest of the team can pull you up. I have a feeling that Kalen DeBoer and his coaching staff are going to get quite a few wins out of this group regardless. But, I think if Ty Simpson works out, LSU goes into this game as an underdog, definitely no matter what. If it doesn't work out, then maybe as of right now, by the way, you can bet on these games like at DraftKings. As of right now, Alabama would be a 6.5 point favorite if you bet on it right now. That's actually the largest underdog LSU would be in any game. But I don't know. Is that deference to the Alabama name? Is that actually based on this year's Crimson Tide team? That's hard to say.
It's also, LSU has lost to Alabama the past 2 seasons, and last year got blown out at home. And that was one of Garrett Nussmeier's worst games of the year against an Alabama defense that brought back most of those players, especially the ones who could have turned pro. They decided to return for the most part. That defense finished tied for 10th nationally in yards per play allowed. And LSU is now going to have to go and deal with them on the road. But if LSU is improved, then that 6.5 is probably, especially Garrett Nussmeier, maybe it's too high. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it could be. I mean, I think we could look at this the first week in November and say, man, LSU will not be getting that many points at that time. By the way, LSU is an underdog in 3 games. They don't have every single game up at DraftKings, but of the ones they do, they're an underdog at Clemson, at Alabama, and they're actually a 1.5 point underdog at Ole Miss, which surprises me some. So that's where we're at, and that's probably where you get that win total of 8.5. But that brings us to.
Well, I was just going to say, one other thing, just as we kind of talk just briefly about Alabama, it's obviously it's year 2 of Kalen DeBoer. Like, what is that team going to? Last year, it seemed like, there was still a sort of in transition from Nick Saban. If they brought in Ryan Grubb, his former offense coordinator at Washington, after he was with the Seahawks for a year, he's back at Alabama. What kind of effect is that going to have? And now is Kalen DeBoer going to really be able to have like his team and his system and his culture in place here in year 2? That's probably going to make a big difference whether or not the Crimson Tide can have a year where they're back in the college football playoff hunt.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think if Alabama loses a couple more games early, the seat gets awfully hot very early for Kalen DeBoer. They wouldn't put up with that after the Nick Saban era in Alabama. So this could be an interesting game for both teams, just depending on how their seasons are going.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what it always is, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. It always is. But I mean, especially so this year could be a huge swing game, not just for this season, but for both programs. So looking forward to that one. Also, most directly looking forward to the number 1 game on our list, and that is LSU's season opening road trip to Clemson, South Carolina, to the other Death Valley. I know that there are LSU fans out there who are going, we've lost 5 straight season openers. can't lose another one. Who did they schedule? Oh my God, Clemson at Clemson. Like it seems so monumental on paper. Like unless you actually go and get this done.
Brian Kelly recently said on a podcast appearance with the college football, the ESPN College Game Days podcast, in reference to the Clemson game, we've circled the game. I've never done that before in openers. It's all over our weight room. It's all over our workouts. We're wearing shirts. I mean, we're doing the kumbaya of we're playing Clemson and we need to beat Clemson. So is that too much pressure? No, I think we've got enough mature veteran guys on this team. We had a clear conversation about why we were going to do it, and they're all in on that. So yeah, I think this game is important. And it, for a variety of reasons, one of them, which you just listed, is that LSU hasn't won a season opener since 2019. They got to do that. Brian Kelly really needs to go out there and be able to win the first game. And I think it's not just to win the first game, but to look like you're already put together in the first game, to at least to some extent. I think everybody's usually got some stuff they've got to work through in week one. But LSU has just looked unprepared, clunky, sloppy for the first 3 years of the Brian Kelly era in those season openers. And it's led to losing some games that they probably could have won. I think in particular last year against USC, letting that lead slip away. And then, or at least was it a tie game and then losing it? And then, at the end there. And then 2022 against Florida State, with that sort of debacle at the very end of that game, LSU almost kind of came back and stole that one, but then they weren't able to finish it off. 2023, Florida State beat them handily. But there were two season openers that in there that they could have won and they didn't. You got to just look better in the first game of the year. That's a big piece of this. But you also now all that's already going on, no matter who you were going to play. And now you have to go to Clemson, a hostile place in the other Death Valley. We won't say one is more Death Valley than the other, but the other one. And against the Clemson team that might be one of its best Clemson teams here, and really in the last 5 years probably. Dabo Swinney, there was a lot of questions about if he had adapted to the times or not. They brought in some transfers, amazing. They've also got a lot of players who have actually been there for a few years, developed, and look really good. Starting with Klubnik, who we already mentioned at quarterback, but also on the defensive line. I mean, TJ Parker is probably is a name who's probably going to go in the first round next year. Peter Woods, another defensive lineman who LSU is going to have to be dealing with. They've got Terrell at cornerback, is a talented player. Antonio Williams at wide receiver is somebody who this new look LSU secondary is going to have to deal with right away. And so I just think there's a lot of factors that make this game really, really difficult. We're not going to make game predictions today, but it's hard it's going to be really, really tough to win that game on the road week one. And then that's what makes it the most difficult game of the season to me is you really got to win a season opener. And lo and behold, you're facing a team that went to the college football playoff and won the ACC last year and is bringing back a lot of that team.
Well, I'm glad Brian Kelly realized it's an important game and circled it. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm playing with that because obviously it's not like he didn't think the other ones were, but after sort of the table slamming moment last year, like obviously he was going to emphasize this game, and it would be. I mean, you talk about make or break. You can't in the era of the 12-team playoff, you can't break your season in week one. But boy, would it feel really good for LSU and the program and the fan base to win that thing, be off and running. Then you're 2-0 with Florida coming to town instead of 1-1. Then there's not so much pressure on that game and the Ole Miss game and the rest of the season, really, because you lose that opener, even in a 12-team playoff era, like you're right up against it already. Wilson, I was talking about the returning production rankings by Bill C. Who do you think where do you think Clemson ranks in returning production percentages for Bill C? He looks at like passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, and defensive statistics. Clemson is ranked what?
I'm going to guess number 2 behind Penn State.
Number 1.
Clemson's okay, where's Penn State?
In the country. Penn State's actually not that high. I don't know. And again, wow. There's 33. Yeah, I don't know how. It's Arizona State that's number 2, surprisingly. So
even after losing Scatterville, that's interesting.
Clemson is just, I mean, they're loaded. They are, and you look at they've slipped back a step from those national title contending teams and national title winning teams that Dabo Swinney had in his early years there at Clemson. I think they're back to that this year. They made the playoff last year, but that was sort of an afterthought. They got in because they won the ACC. They, went to Texas and kind of just checked the box of making the playoff. I don't think they were really one of the top 12 teams in the country. This year, they're going to be. And so to me, this is huge. And the flip side of this is we talk about the risk. You lose your 6th straight season opener and the margin for error is gone and everyone is screaming at Brian Kelly again and everything feels bad. The flip side of that is if you could somehow win this game, LSU is set up for a tremendous season.
Yes, they very much are. You don't want to like bury a team in week 1. You don't want to crown a team in week 1. But if LSU can win that game, it puts everybody on notice. And as you also mentioned, it gives you more margin for error as you go through the SEC schedule. You could lose 2 SEC games and still make the playoff at 10-2. You'd be all right. But if you lose that Clemson game, then you can really afford 1 loss, and maybe you can afford 2. There have been years in which in the prior playoff format, if it was 12 teams, 9-3 teams would have gotten in some cases. Obviously, it didn't happen last year, but you don't really want to put yourself in that position where you're on the fringe, especially this LSU team where LSU is invested. They're trying to build around a second-year starting quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier and really make a playoff push here. You don't want to play with your back up against the wall the whole year, I don't think. If you really are going to assert yourself as a contender to not only make the playoff, but as Brian Kelly has said, he thinks this is a team that can win the SEC and compete for championships. And if you're going to be that, I don't think you have to beat Clemson to do that, obviously, but it would go a long way. And it would just the vibes would be so much better around Baton Rouge. Like we said, we've dealt with how everybody feels in September. After the past 5 years, after losing the season opener, everybody's down and they're like, oh, this team's not going to be any good. And sometimes LSU goes on a run and makes a push, but it takes a while for people to buy back in. And so if they were able to go and win week 1 at Clemson, the confidence meter in the fan base, I think, would be starting to get maybe too high.
It would be through the roof, no doubt about it. So to recap what we have, two of our difficult 3 games, most difficult 3 games are 2 of the first 3 games of the year. 4 of the first 6 are 4 of the first 6 games of the year. So it's a little bit of a front-loaded schedule, but here's where we midsummer look at LSU's most difficult games. We had number 1 Clemson, 2 Alabama, 3 Florida, 4 at Ole Miss, 5 at Oklahoma, 6 South Carolina, 7 Texas A&M, 8 Arkansas, 9 at Vandy, and then the gimmies 10, 11, 12 were Western Kentucky, Louisiana Tech, and Southeastern. When you look at that list, Wilson, any final thoughts or team? I think we had them too low or too high.
No, I think we nailed it completely. It's going to we're going to be proven at the end of the year that it was all exactly right. We're not going to have any regrets whatsoever, especially no regrets about Texas A&M at 7 and Ole Miss at 4.
Well said. We're going to chisel it in stone. We're going to make the tablets. If we're wrong, good luck finding us. All right. For Wilson Alexander, I'm Zach Ewing. This has been the LSU Sports Insider. Beat the heat, everybody, and we will see you next time.